For those of you who would like to get credits, I have a code for the CLE, which I will give again after our panelists are finished presenting. That is REG 123. And if you'd like credits from the American Planning Association, there is a sign-up sheet right up here. Just 1 minute, technical. I'd like to start by thanking all of our sponsors. We are very grateful for your support in allowing us to hold this conference. And just to review a few brief housekeeping details, for those of you who are in person, if you could silence all of your electronic devices and speak loudly and clearly when we get to the Q&A. And for our virtual audience, please use the Q&A function to ask questions. We will be tracking that throughout the presentations, and we expect to answer those at the end. This program is being recorded and will be provided in the conference app. Again, we are offering credits for this session. I already gave the CLE code, and if you are wanting credits from the American Planning Association, please either indicate that you're here in the chat if you're online, or sign in the sheet if you're here in person. It is my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers. Ben Spinelli, who is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Water Protection and Planning Committee, Julia Summers, the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, and Jacqueline Rhodes, Assistant Executive Director of the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. So with that, I will turn it over to Ben to get us started.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ben Spinelli, the Executive Director of the Highlands Water Protection and Planning Council. Just get that right. No, it's okay. So we're going to talk about regional planning and stormwater. I promise I'll get to stormwater eventually. We have a little bit of an identity problem with the Highlands. If you ask somebody about the Pinelands, everybody knows where the Pinelands is. If you ask somebody about the Highlands, they're liable to say, what, you mean the town down the shore on Raritan Bay, right? The Highlands actually has an identity, and it's got an identity recognized by the federal government, right? As early as 1990, the U.S. Forest Service studied the four-state Highlands region that covers parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut. It actually extends a bit into southwestern Massachusetts and on the south end into northwestern Maryland. But the Forest Service study area was limited to the four states. After that study was done in 2002, it became the impetus for New Jersey to take action to protect the region because of its importance to the drinking water supply of the state. New Jersey is the only one of the four states that actually took legislative action to protect the resources of the region. And here's where the legislature made its findings as to why it was important to pass the Highlands Act. And if you take a look back in time, this was an animation done by Rutgers that demonstrated that over a period of time, how much of the region was being eaten up by suburban sprawl. And when you look at the importance, why is the Highlands important? Well, because so many people rely on its resources. I'll get to it in a second. But I just want to put something just for your reference. New York City, with about 9 million people back in the 1880s, set aside 2,000 square miles in the Catskills and east of the Hudson and the Croton watershed to protect the water supply for the city that it would become, right? The Highlands is about 1,300 square miles and provides for approximately the same population, right? New Jersey's got a population of about 9 million people. Not every person in New Jersey relies on Highlands water, but enough of them do, and I'll get to it. So when the 2004 New Jersey Highlands Act was passed, and that followed up the federal Highlands Conservation Act that had been passed earlier that year, but didn't put the kinds of land use protections in that the Highlands did. It covered 88 municipalities, portions of 7 counties, and to my bane and my constant annoyance, split the region into 2 areas, the preservation area and the planning area, right? And it's a roughly equal split, right? It's 880,000 acres, right? About 440,000 are in the planning area, about 440,000 are in the preservation area. Why is that important? Well, in the planning area, conformance with the Highlands Regional Master Plan and the regulations that go along with it is voluntary, right? In the preservation area, it's mandatory. So our impact in the planning area has to rely upon our charm, right? And our ability to be persuasive and to convince municipalities that they should align their planning with the regional master plan. I will say that the act does not make that voluntary for state agencies. And another one of the banes of my existence is ensuring that the various state agencies recognize the Highlands Regional Master Plan whenever they make decisions about capital improvements, investments, incentive programs, regulations, right? All those things should be consistent and not at odds with the regional master plan. Because when you look at why it's important, 70% of the people in New Jersey, 7.5 million people, get all or a portion of their drinking water from the Highlands, as far away as Gloucester County, right? And certainly all 830,000 people who live in the Highlands region rely on the region for their water. And I know Jacqueline's going to be mad at me and make this joke. 800 people live in the Pinelands, right? Right? It's easy to protect the Pinelands. Nobody lives there. Right? 830,000 people live in the Highlands. Right? So we have to provide for the needs of 830,000 people on a daily basis and still export water to 7.5 million people outside of the region. It makes it a really difficult puzzle to solve, right? And along with the water resources, you got really great resources that people a lot of times don't associate with being in the Highlands. They know I've been to Northern Green Forest or Greenwood Lake or Lake Apacon, or I've been to farms to pick apples or pumpkins. They know they've been out there and experienced those resources. They may not always know that they were in the Highlands. So all those things, including the great small towns, are part of what we have to manage as our mission, right? And if you look at the Highlands region, every square inch, right, of that region, every square inch of the 880,000 acres of the Highlands contributes to a water supply somewhere. All right, it's either going to surface reservoirs like the North Watershed or Spruce Run or Round Valley. It's going to river intakes along the Passaic River, the Raritan River, or the Delaware, or it's coming out of groundwater intakes, both for the people who live there, highly reliant on personal groundwater wells. But there are large scale extraction wells like the Morris County MUA's Flanders Valley wells that extract groundwater as well. So the entire region is important for its water supply values. Our primary tool at the Highlands Council in managing the region is our land use capability zone map. This is about to get updated a little bit. There'll probably be a little more green on the map when we're done with our updates. But when you look at it, right, everything in green or brown, that's what we consider our conservation zone or our protection zone. Those are the places where the conservation values are high, where we don't allow utilities to be extended, where we want to be able to protect the resources. The yellows are the places where people already live, right? 830,000 people live somewhere in the region, right? They generally live where you see yellow and orange on this map. And that's that's where we get our biggest stormwater challenges from, because as you could guess, that's probably where the impervious coverage is. And as we try to manage the region, right, a lot of people are under the misconception that the Highlands Act protected the entire region. It did not. All right, I'm here to tell you that it did not. Right, first of all, as I said, planning area conformance is voluntary. Right, plus the development pressures that you saw back when I showed you that slide of the red stuff creeping across the face of the region, right? That was largely suburban sprawl, right? It was housing development that was coming about. Today, the threats are a little different. There's still some housing demand for the region, but warehousing. The new affordable housing bill is going to put a lot of pressure on the region. Solar development, infill development, right? These things are all still there. In fact, if you look at the Highlands as a whole, there are still 19,000 undeveloped but developable lots left in the Highlands. 230 square miles of the region, lots that enjoy exemptions or waivers from the Highlands Act and can still be built upon. So our job in protecting the region is not done. Right, so we need to be able to get ourselves a dedicated source of funding to preserve those lands, which doesn't exist. And I'll compound it a little bit. Because we don't have a dedicated source of funding for protection of land in the Highlands, we can't avail ourselves of federal Highlands Conservation Act funds. And every year we're leaving about $7.5 million on the table because we can't match that money, right? Just bear that in mind. So when we look at stormwater in the region, yes, the Highlands is highly impacted by stormwater events, right? Even though we are not a highly impervious coverage impacted region, still the extreme precipitation events recently, this is just last July, right? This is just outside the Highlands. This is in Warren County. This is just over the border from the Highlands in Knowlton Township. But this is typical of what happened in Western Warren County, or a portion of the Highlands, right? So we try to take a watershed based approach to everything that we do, including stormwater, right? As we'd like to say, I could have started this talk, stormwater has a regional basis. We're a regional planning entity. It would be a great idea if we managed stormwater on a regional basis. Thank you. It's been nice to see you. But we're taking, right? We take this seriously, but we have some impediments to it, right? We look and we evaluate the region. These are the HUC, this is at the HUC 14 level. And what you see generally in green are the sub watersheds that are in great shape, all right, that have high quality water, right? The almost every stream in the Highlands is a C1 stream, right? The yellows and the browns are places, and if you look back at that first map, the land use capability zone map, you're going to see a big correlation between where the browns and the yellows are and where those yellow areas are, because that's where the impervious coverage is. So we want to be able to help our towns meet the new stormwater requirements. Of all the towns in New Jersey going from tier B to tier A, 1/3 of them are Highlands municipalities, right? So they're the towns that are going to have the biggest lift going forward. DEP has made $75,000 grants available to those B to A municipalities. The remainder get $25,000. I can tell you right now, it's a drop in the bucket. We only have a $2.1 million grant budget every year that we have to spread across 88 municipalities for all sorts of planning, for doing their master plans, for doing trails plans, for doing watershed improvement plans, for doing all kinds of things. And now the stormwater issue comes up, and it's really going to tax our ability to support the municipalities. But we're doing the best that we can. What we're doing, we require the municipalities in the region to expend their DEP funds first, and then come to us, right? And then we've got a sample scope of work. We've got model stormwater ordinances that we can give them, and we can support their work. I would love to have a stormwater engineer on staff. If anybody from the Office of Management and Budget is listening, I would love to have a stormwater engineer on staff so we can provide technical support to our municipalities. But that's the approach that we're taking. One of the impediments to it is that the MS4 permits are issued on a municipality by municipality basis, right? Instead of on a regional basis. We're trying to find candidates to form stormwater utilities within the region. And when you aggregate a number of municipalities to cooperate and handle their stormwater on that regional or watershed-based basis, right, they still have to go back and get their permits individually. It would be great if you could get a stormwater utility to be the permit holder for all of the constituent municipalities. That seems to be an awful easy fix and an awful practical way of approaching this. But that, New Jersey's very resistant to some of these things, and there's a reason why we have zero stormwater utilities statewide. But what we would like to do is really approach an existing municipal utilities authority that's already handling wastewater or drinking water, and get them to add stormwater to their portfolio of what they do. Right? It just makes sense on a long-term basis. All right, so this is another look. This one gives me some nightmares sometimes, right? This is impervious coverage across the region, right? Our job is to make sure that the water quality of the region remains good, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, but 50 years from now or 100 years from now, right? When we're all going to be gone. And so we've mapped stormwater. I mean, we've mapped impervious coverage in the region on a sub-watershed basis as well. Everything you see in green is less than 10%. Why 10%? Because that's generally the threshold at which you have impaired waterways, right? And everything in gray or dark gray is greater than 10%, dark gray is greater than 25%, right? Those are places where water quality is going to be impaired, but where the stormwater management issues are going to be heightened because of that impervious coverage, right? And so my job and our job at the Highlands is to make sure that everything that's green stays green, because once it goes to gray, it's not going back. All right. And my biggest fear is that we're going to turn around 10 years from now and look, and this map is going to look different than it does today. Because to me, it already looks distressing enough. So, you know, we look at impervious coverage as an important part of degradation of stream quality, right? It causes increases in non-point source pollution, and it contributes to flooding, right? To me right now, the biggest threat in the region is because we have been so good at limiting development in the region. There's an awful lot of open space left in the Highlands, sitting there waiting to be developed in the planning area where conformance is voluntary, and the warehouse developments and the housing developments and the solar developments that are coming are all going to put down an awful lot of impervious coverage. Think about this. One large warehouse development will likely put down about 50 acres of impervious coverage, right? The average sub-watershed is about 5,000 acres in size. That means one development is 1% of the watershed, all right? And if you've got a 10% full budget, right, we don't want to push you to 10%, but if 10% is the threshold, if your town's at 8, if your town's at 9, one development will push you over the edge from being a green sub-watershed to a gray one, right? And so that's what we're looking at. We look at forest health. Right, a lot of the region is still forested. The number one indicator of water quality, water quantity, and protection of water timing, so that there's a constant, predictable flow over the year, is forest health and forest soil health. Right, and yet we're not doing much to make sure that the forests of the Highlands today, right, 2004 when the Highlands Act was passed, should have been the nadir of the condition of the Highlands forest, that they should have been rebounding by now. And our job is 50 years from now or 100 years from now, that forest coverage is going to be greater. Forest soil health is going to be greater than it is today. And yet we're not taking the steps necessary to make sure that's going to happen. Why is that important when we're talking about stormwater? Because of the role that healthy forests play in retention of precipitation events, and increasingly with climate change, extreme precipitation events. So it's an important factor in handling stormwater. Right. And like I said, the climate change, my goodness, my job wasn't hard enough. Let's make it a real stunt, because we don't know. Just think about last year in the Highlands at our headquarters, 72 inches of rainfall. That's like tropical numbers, right? And consider that for 3 months of the year, it didn't rain. When June hit, we thought we were going to be in the middle of a severe drought. Little did we know someone was about to turn the faucet on. Right. And in the remainder of the year, the remaining 9 months, 72 inches of rain, right? That increases in temperature tells us, let's go back to forest management. It tells us that the conditions are going to be a lot more like the Southern Appalachians, where it's considered temperate rainforest than what we're used to. And what's that going to mean ecologically to the region? We have no idea. Don't you think that's the kind of thing we should know about? I do, but we'll figure that out. Right. But like I said, a good portion of the region still is forested. The forest is in all different types of conditions. Some of it healthy, particularly in the northernmost portion of the region. Much of it degraded by fragmentation, by invasive species, by diseases. Right, Morris County, right in the heart of the Highlands, in the nation, the largest constituent of ash trees as the makeup of the forest. What's happening to the ash trees? They're almost all dead today, right? In the last 10 years, we've seen a species that's so important to the forest health of the region disappear before. Well, it isn't disappearing. They're standing there dead, waiting to fall on you. So, but that's just another challenge. So for the next 20 years, what are we looking at? Housing demands. Everybody looks at the Highlands, right? It's like that scene in War of Worlds when and if you've read the book by H.G. Wells, they were jealously looking at the resources of our planet. People look towards the Highlands and they see all kinds of things that they want. Housing demands, commercial and warehouse development, solar installations, right? Conversion of farmland, which has never been seen as the resource that it is. If you want to think about what climate change means, think about this. Good, healthy soils in the Highlands. If you have a farm in the Highlands, you're within a 2-hour drive of 20 million people. Do you think that might be important to food security going forward in a place that will get at least 50 inches of rain, if not 72? So maybe saving farmland because of the food production capacity might be important. The increase in impervious coverage is a problem. The increased demands as the population of the state goes, right? Right now, we export about 864 million gallons a day to other parts of the state. As the population in the rest of the state grows, that number is only going to go up. So we have to be able to do that in the face of climate uncertainty, in the face of all these other things that are challenging us. And at the end of the day, everybody wants something from the Highlands, right? We can give some, right? Where that's why the region was protected. We can provide for the needs of the state, but we have to be able to manage it sustainably over the long term. Because again, how well we do our jobs today is not going to be measured by a job review a year from now, or what we look at a year from now. It's going to be 50 years from now. It's going to be 100 years from now. And if we're not making decisions where we say, look, 50 years from now, somebody's going to look back. I hope they look back and say, I don't know who did this, but thank goodness they did it. Not who were the idiots who did this 50 years ago, right? It seems that's a fairly simple way to approach, making policy and doing your jobs. So I'll leave it at that. I want you to be hopeful because we are trying to do our job. The Highlands Act does protect the resources of the region. They're there, they're great, but they're threatened, right? The Highlands Act did not stop the threats to the region. And we just have to be able to manage this on a regional basis, no matter what the impediments or the obstacles are. Thank you.
Good question.
I think we're waiting for questions till the end.
Okay, said we're gonna hold questions until the end. Wait, I'm going up there.
Yes.
Welcome, everyone. I get to try to debunk all the facts that Ben shared about the Pinelands by going next. That's okay. I am Jacqueline Rhodes, Assistant Executive Director of Pinelands Preservation Alliance. This is Julia's. Hold on, gotta skip through.
Do you want to let Julia go since your slides are there? Why don't we just do that?
Sounds good.
Sorry.
I'll be back, people.
Don't leave.
And I will not be trying to debunk anything that Ben shared. I am sensitive. Well, first of all, I'm Julia Summers. I'm the Executive Director of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition. I'm also a state planning commissioner. I am the chair of the New Jersey League of Conservation Voters. I sit on the board of the Pinchot Institute, and I'm on several other organizations. So I know a lot of people. But I'm really interested to know who you are, because I'm very sensitive to the fact that this session will provide an overview of lessons learned and specific suggestions for successful regional collaboration that will be useful to you. So are there any municipal officials here? Two, great. I guess there are nonprofit and watershed associations. Oh my goodness. Okay, lots of them. Members of the public, just interested members of the public. One, okay, two, okay, great. Well, I hope you'll hear an awful lot of interesting stuff about two very important regions to the state, the Highlands and the Pinelands. But they have legislation to help them work regionally. You heard a lot from Senator Smith about how impossible it is to get towns to give up home rule and to work regionally. But I would argue from what you're going to learn about the Highlands and what you'll learn about the Pinelands, that even if you are not in a region that has legislation like that, you're crazy if you are not looking at least some things regionally. So that says Highlands agriculture, which is not. Let's go back to the beginning. There we go. So some of this is obvious. You just heard from Ben, because I wasn't certain what he was going to be talking about, but you heard about how there's a planning area and a preservation area. And there's something similar in the Pines, except they have legislation that they can use. but Jacqueline will tell you more about that. It is the Highlands, water supply and, and a management plan, but my goodness, this region is important for the state. As Ben was talking about, over 70% of the residents of the state get some or all of their water from the New Jersey Highlands, something that the Pinelands can't even come close. Yeah, well,
Wait, why did they go first?
but this is a reminder of how important, how much of the state is covered by Highlands water. But this is also something that I think that across the country, we are not focused on. We have groundwater deficits, certainly in the Highlands. Anything that is not blue on that map has a deficit of some kind. Now, we supply water from the Highlands to most of the state of New Jersey, and all of it begins, or almost all of it begins in some way, well, not with 72 inches of rain, but an awful lot of it begins as groundwater. And we are not replenishing our aquifers, not just in the Highlands, but across the country. It is startling what is going on in the US. And we are barreling down the road towards a giant disaster. I don't know how states in the middle of the country are going to live off desalinated water that's going to have to get shipped from the coasts. I mean, good Lord, but let's focus on just the Highlands. People don't think, you hear 72 inches of rain, we're never going to have any water problems, but look at that map. And I say, especially when we get more than 3 months of drought, we are looking at problems. Oh my goodness, the State Planning Commission just arrived. Hi, daughter. She's my boss. So I think this issue of groundwater deficits is really very important in the Highlands. And Jacqueline will talk about how they don't have deep wells in the Pinelands. They don't need to have deep wells in the Pinelands. They have an aquifer that's just a couple of feet below your feet that they're trying to protect. So this issue of groundwater is really a key one. And as a municipality, you need to be thinking about how you work with your neighboring towns to protect groundwater in your region. And that is, again, where the issue of impervious cover comes in. If you're covering up all your recharge areas, you're not going to be helping yourself. We have a prime example of that not to pick on this town, but I'm going to pick on this town. Parsippany has a 7 million gallon a day water deficit. And they have covered the town in office buildings and development. And, I don't see, and there is a reservoir right there, right next to Parsippany, which they don't own, because back when it was discovered that cholera was waterborne, the city of Newark bought 35,000 acres. The city of Newark is the largest property owner in the Highlands. They have 5 reservoirs. Jersey City followed not long after and built 2 reservoirs in the Highlands. And one of them is right at the Parsippany border. They look at it, but they can't use it. So Parsippany has been they have to ship in all their water from outside of the town. They've been incredibly short-sighted. So don't you do that. Ben talked about the importance of agriculture in the Highlands, and I could not agree with him more about how we have a region between 2 of the largest population centers in the world, never mind just the country. These agricultural soils should be protected. At the New Jersey Highlands Coalition, we completely buy into the importance of solar. But I'm sorry, you lose me on solar in our forests or solar on farmland. That doesn't make sense. There are lots of places to put solar, but it shouldn't be on our best farmland soils. But that's the cheapest place to put it often. And so that's where it quite often goes. So we did oppose a big solar project in Harmony Township over near the Delaware River. It was approved. We were unsuccessful. But to get to Senator Smith's point, the reason why 2 things happened. They couldn't get the PJM, which is the industry organization that oversees getting your power into the grid, they couldn't, it was going to be at least 2 years before they were going to be able to get through the PJM process. And in that time, hallelujah, interest rates went up and the financial model for building the project got blown apart. So it actually didn't happen, and it's not going to happen. So there are lots of ways to win the war. And that was not a way I had anticipated, but okay, but we shouldn't be building solar on prime farmland soils. But you can see in green there, lots of prime Warren County agricultural soils and southern Morris County, not quite as extensive as Warren County, but plenty. And if I were to show you Hunterdon County too has plenty of agricultural soils. This is something that is very close to the heart of the New Jersey Highlands Coalition and our Natural Heritage Committee, who are just meeting right now as we speak, because we have been working to try and protect these forests for over 3 years. Many of these forests are on public lands. So what's the problem, you say? Well, the problem is that the Department of Environmental Protection likes to cut them down. Unfortunately, our Division of Parks and Forests and the Division of Fish and Wildlife like to create, you heard the senator talk about creating diversity in our forested lands. You can do that in many different ways, but you don't need to do it by cutting down our forests. There is lots of new peer-reviewed science about the importance of protecting our forests for all kinds of reasons, including diversity, but particularly because maturing forests sequester more carbon, atmospheric carbon, than any young forests, or never mind how fast they're growing. It's the mature forests that are the most important to protect. It's the mature trees that have the most lumber value. And in New Jersey, most of those mature trees are here in the Highlands. So it's a target for the small forestry industry that we have in New Jersey. And there is federal funds available from the Department of Agriculture under a program called the Young Forest Initiative. It does sound so nice, doesn't it? To cut down those forests. It's supposedly to create habitat for the golden-winged warbler, which has actually moved to Canada because it too is been impacted by climate change. It's not actually that rare if you're up in Canada. It's become almost non-existent in the New Jersey Highlands. So why we're creating habitat for the golden-winged warbler is a mystery to me. Anyway, I salute our colleagues at the New Jersey Highlands Council who have done a magnificent job of putting together a forestry guidance for the Highlands, only to have it removed from their guidance at the last minute by DEP, who said that they will be doing this themselves. So I hope every one of you, and I will be getting your email addresses from our friends at the Watershed Institute, I hope every one of you will support us when we try to persuade DEP to move forward and implement in the Highlands the forestry guidance that the Highlands Council has put together, because it is better than anything else that has been put together by the state of New Jersey to protect these forests. You can see, Ben showed you this about the importance of keeping things green. And the ultimate connectors, you know, water flows downhill, are rivers. And as Ben pointed out, a couple of years ago, initially it was about 700 and some miles of river were proposed for upgrade to C1. It ended up being statewide, a little over 600 miles of river were upgraded to Category 1. Over 400 of those miles were in the Highlands. We have more trout streams. Here's a great thing you can tell people, when you say, well, I live in New Jersey, and they say, oh, poor you. We have more trout streams in New Jersey than any other state in the Northeast. Why? Because we protect them and because we have great forests. And they are great connectors. And for towns that are not in the Pinelands and the Highlands, your rivers are your great connectors, but you can't stop. Well, I'll get to some flooding in a second. C1 streams feeding the Spruce Run Reservoir. Pop quiz for 10 points. What's the largest reservoir in the state of New Jersey? Yes. What's the second largest? Wanacue. What's the third largest? Yes, Spruce Run. And the fourth largest? Nope. Nope. Monksville. All of these reservoirs are actually threatened in one way or another by development that is going on upstream of them, even though they're in the highlands. But you need to protect your communities and the rivers that flow through your towns, because they're either going into a reservoir or they're somebody's water source, or, you know, this is very important for the future. And you are part of that. Here's the Musconetcong, another connector. The only river that, well, it's not entirely true, but certainly the longest river that is entirely in the highlands. Now, this is not in the highlands, but it's not very far away. And this happened in just a major flood. It wasn't a hurricane. That, I think, is just a frightening. This is also on Route 206. That was at points nearly 3 feet deep. It is not near any river. There is no river that has overflowed its bank to create that flooding. That was just impervious cover. No, I think that was about 3 years ago. There it is again. I mean, and the EPA or USGS EPA has told us that, you know, or the whole of New Jersey is certainly going to be impacted by more storms, but it's the highlands that are going to get a greater number of more intense storms. So this flooding is part of our future. That's a consequence of just not even a named storm. That's what happened in Warren County. It was startling. Now, I don't think that's Knowlton, but that was nearby. This was in the highlands. More damage, you know, and there are consequences, never mind the public health and safety. There are financial consequences for this. And the irony of ironies, when the Highlands Act was passed, Warren County was one of the appellants that took challenging the passage of the Highlands Act all the way to the Supreme Court. We anticipate this year, finally, that Warren County is actually going to conform to the Highlands Regional Master Plan. Fingers crossed. So, but those are sort of some of the reasons why it's in their interest. So now it's Jacqueline's turn. It says Pinelands. But the biggest point to take away for non-Highlands and Pinelands is that you really need to work with your neighbors. It doesn't matter if you're not in a protected area. There are so many ways in which you should be working together.
All right, so now I get it. You saved the best for last.
That's right.
Although, from what I've heard today, Highlands has better trees. They provide people a whole lot more water, and everybody wants to go to the Highlands for something. You could send them our way then. Okay.
We'll have to buy her a drink.
So again, Jacqueline Rhodes, Assistant Executive Director at Pinelands Preservation Alliance. And so I hope my message is a little bit about how there can be lessons learned from the Pinelands model, because it has been around a little bit longer and apparently is doing the job a little bit better. I don't know. No, but we had some great advocates that had created the statutory framework that really made this possible. But I will say there's significant threats that still exist, but it is definitely a beautiful place. So you can see here carved out in the night sky, the Pinelands over this one little portion right here. So, you know, when I do say there are threats, obviously this plan has worked out really well. We do have places that are protected. We do have this opportunity where you can still see a clear night sky and things that you wouldn't see if you're in the city in portions of the Highlands. but you can come to Pinelands to see this stuff. Just curious here, you know, since we have a bet going, how many people have been to the Pinelands? All right, put your hands down. How many people have been to the Highlands? I don't know, it's pretty close.
Everybody knows where the Pinelands.
Okay. So everybody knows where the Pinelands are, and I just showed you on my nice sky map. If you want to know, because we don't have time today, the rich history behind the creation of the Pinelands, I'll give you a little bit of a tidbit shortly, but you can go to our website here, and there's a great video about, you know, the threat of a jet port, and really that triggered the protection of this amazing area. But in terms of planning, so you got to see nice colored map for the Highlands. This is the nice colored map for the Pinelands. And we have all these different management areas. So it was interesting yesterday, somebody said to me, why don't you get more resources from the feds, considering, you know, it was created under National Parks Act for a national reserve. And I said, well, it's a different model, right? It's unique, and it's still unique in that you still have development occurring in what is considered a national reserve. It's not a national park, right? We don't have, you know, places set aside where it's like, absolutely, you can't come into this area for no development, except for the places that are owned by lands owned by the state. Or for instance, like Forsyth Wildlife Management Area, where again, that's owned by Fish and Wildlife at the federal level. Ultimately, the idea here was a balance, and that was meant to allow for some development to continue to occur. It was meant as a compromise for obviously all the politicians that got together in a room and said, well, no, I still want development over here. And oh, we still have Atlantic City and we want to continue to develop that. And so this was the outcome. And it was because of those leaders with the vision, like Governor Byrne, that established the Pinelands Protection Act, and ultimately the agency responsible for governing all this land, that we have what we have today. Now, the areas that you could see around the green, you know, green being some of your highest protection area, your preservation area, vast majority of that is state-owned land, maybe a little bit, like I said, for Forsyth, which is a National Wildlife Refuge area. But then you have the dark green, which is considered to be like forest area. So some development can still occur there, not at the same intensity, obviously. And the idea there is meant for greater ecological purposes. But then you have your yellow, your orange, your red areas, which could be like Pinelands towns and villages and regional growth areas, where it is significantly managed, but a lot more development. One thing that definitely resonates both in the Highlands and the Pinelands is that 10% threshold of impervious developed. Even, I would say, if it's not entirely impervious, but in some way manipulated or modified, that can definitely have an impact on our water, watershed qualities, especially our water quality. So we've been fortunate. Definitely this plan has worked. But, you know, just like where the Highlands is today, Pinelands was like that years ago. We're still fighting with municipalities to come into conformance to a certain degree, for people trying to repeal the act, from, you know, farmers and landowners complaining constantly at Pinelands Commission meetings saying, this is ridiculous, you took away my property rights, and so on and so forth, right?
They still
Yeah.
do that in the
Exactly. We still have those people that were around close to the beginning of when the Pinelands was created, showing up maybe at meetings and still complaining a little bit, but definitely the culture has changed much. But we still have a lot of threats. And especially as it relates to water, right? That's why we're all here. So we do have this great vast area of surficial aquifer that we call our Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer. You can, some of those photos I showed you were literally the aquifer peeking out at the surface. So we're talking about 17 trillion gallons of fresh water. So that's great. right? We do actually have water that supplies more than 800 people there. Sorry, it's more like 50% of the Highlands population. You're looking at about 400,000, but some of that aquifer actually drains into the Delaware River watershed, and the Delaware River obviously supplies significant amount of water for higher population areas, like, for instance, Philadelphia. So that's why Highlands and Pinelands, when we're talking about protecting water supply for this vast region, it is absolutely critical that we make sure these places are not manipulated. And yes, there's a bit more work we have to do in the Highlands. Pinelands, we still need to keep up the fight. And we're still having problems with even some wells running dry, because there are people on the fringe of that Pinelands boundary that aren't necessarily within the KC aquifer, but are in the 800-foot sands aquifer. And there have been issues with saltwater intrusion as a result of that, because of both use and, of course, sea level rise. So even though the aquifer itself may seem like, oh, tons of water should be protected, but as those people run out of water on the fringe, where do you think they're going to look? You know, they're going to come into the inland areas of the Pinelands. And although it is protected now in terms of transporting water out, you never know what can happen when there's a crisis moment and what people will do. So that requires us, you, all advocates, to remain vigilant. And so we're seeing this. We're seeing that water levels declining in certain places because of high population, because of where wells are placed. And there are many examples of this, and this is from U.S. Geological Survey, constantly checking these areas for that problem. Here you could see in the big blue areas where we're running into issues in terms of how much is being withdrawn on a daily basis. Obviously, those areas represent those fringe areas where more development can take place. But if we don't protect this aquifer, these things will get worse. Some of that lends itself to having a strong state water supply master plan. That is something that DEP is working on now, and the draft is out, and we need to make sure that it protects these areas for at least the people, let alone, you know, the plants and animals that exist there. And many of the creatures that exist in the Pinelands are so rare that they exist no place else on the planet, right? And that's why it was designated a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve. Sorry, one up on the Highlands. And because we recognize that uniqueness. It's also very unique because of its water quality. Stormwater is not our friend, especially in the Pinelands, because we do have waterways that are more acidic. So for us, even a small amount of stormwater can start to raise that pH level from like a 4.5 to 5.5. As soon as you start doing that, it's unfortunate, but amazing how quickly that area will change in terms of being able to accommodate the species that were conditioned with those acidic conditions. And then you start having, you know, different types of frogs that move into the area, certain fish that start to die. And it still seems okay, right? Because if you're like, oh, the water, you know, close to neutral, all right. Well, no, it's not all right for us because we're losing that rare habitat. And you could see here, you know, you have this area protected, but then you have this line, right, where development comes right up onto it. So you're still compromising, you know, around the edges, and that still has an impact as it relates to stormwater and, of course, water supply. Now, there have been some good things that the commission has definitely done in terms of local management planning, where, like, for instance, our Black Run watershed located in Evesham Township on the edge. So if you're looking at close to like Cherry Hill area, western portion of the Pinelands, you know, getting closer to Philadelphia, this is actually on the boundary there where you start to leave the Pinelands, but this watershed is still within the Pinelands. This somehow has remained intact and protected among this circle here. You could see these yellow dots and these developed areas. This is where the water quality has become compromised. Again, because, you know, once you get past that 10% threshold, it's done. But somehow, some way, no one has developed or come in to develop the headwaters of this area. So this represented a unique case where we're trying to change the management area there. It was designated for growth. And so the plan was to go ahead and try to change it to forest area or try to get that land preserved indefinitely. And so that effort still continues to today. This was a planning effort done by the commission. Oh my goodness, I would say at least 15 years ago. And to this day, they're just starting to work on the amendments to the comprehensive management plan that would allow that to become forest area. This is where I'm saying the work never ends, right? We can lose and wipe out that watershed in its entirety if that development were to take place, and that's what we're trying to protect. So our part, Pinelands Preservation Alliance, you know, we're trying to continue to make that connection for people, because as some people think that the Pinelands is fully protected and all good to go, it still is not the case. We continue to have threats. We continue to have projects, warehouses, forested areas being designated as redevelopment areas, and then trying to clear it all out for huge, you know, housing complex. We do have threats from climate change. We do have wells that are running dry on the edge and are looking for sources of water supply. So we need to keep the message up to save this source, because without it, obviously, it not only affects the people in the Pinelands, but of course, downstream as well. Do you remember this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, see, we joined together, right? Because we love each other, and we recognize that we do. The water supply in both these areas is absolutely critical. This was a campaign a number of years ago. Governor Kane, you know, great spokesperson for both the Highlands and Pinelands, saying, you know, we need to protect this resource. There's no doubt about it. And so really, if you're outside of these two regions, what can you do besides, you know, joining our organizations? Well, not Ben's, but, you know, me and Julia, to continue with our advocacy, but also you can implement changes. And the idea is to push municipalities that either just outside the Pinelands, we do have some municipalities that share a portion in the Pinelands and outside. And so that town has the right to adopt two different types of stormwater ordinances, so that for development that occurs outside the Pinelands, they can be more flexible, more lax, allowing more impervious coverage, whatever the case is. But if we have good advocates, they could say, well, no, why don't we adopt that same ordinance both outside that we have on the inside? And some of the changes that the Pinelands Commission did for stormwater called for minor developments to require the new stormwater rules. They also required a numeric nitrogen standard for 65% removal. We also do not allow for stormwater to be discharged to waterways. It has to be infiltrated in. And so these are opportunities for municipalities, even if it's not those specific changes. There are plenty of other ones, which I'm sure you've heard about and know about, Watershed Institute and model ordinances. But these are examples to show that people are pushing that envelope. They're not just adopting what DEP is saying. And granted, DEP made improvements. We were happy with that. There's more to be done. And so we don't just have to wait for DEP to make those changes. Municipalities can do those changes. Obviously, working together on a stormwater utility. These are all things that we need to do to deal with the problems of past development and to make sure we're set in place for any new development that comes into play. So with that said, come see me sometime. This is our farmstead and house. where I'm located, maybe come out for a canoe trip, you know, come join us. Highlands, come on down, and hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all three of you. I hope that the audience has some good questions. And I'm just going to repeat that CLE code one more time. It's REG 123 for anyone who needs those credits. If you would ask your question, I'm just going to repeat it after you ask it so that the people in the Zoom world can hear it.
Why is solar development considered to be a non-impervious surface?
So the question is about solar development and whether it is non-impervious or impervious.
Depends on, right? Mostly they calculate the area of the stanchions, right? Not the area of the panels. It is considered impervious coverage.
Right off the panel?
It does, but that's, you know, that's why you only calculate the stanchion where it hits the ground. Right? But what we're talking about is consuming prime agricultural soils that have a much higher purpose than housing solar panels. Right?
Yes.
Are lawns and farmland in, say, corn, beans, commodity crops considered pervious or impervious?
So I'll just repeat the question. It is, are farms with crops that are in, help me, soybeans and commodity crops considered pervious or impervious?
And lawns.
And lawns.
It depends on your definition. Generally, they're considered pervious, right? Because they're not covered with solid coverage, but you know, lawns can have runoff that's roughly equal to pavement, right?
Right. It depends on their compaction level,
Right.
right? And that determines how much infiltration takes place. Where our property is located, we have 72 acres of farmland. It was constantly treated and harvested for soy. The amount of water that would flow off that property during a storm was significant. It was a huge contributor to stormwater and loss of soil. We have since transformed that entire area because it was donated to us. You don't see any water leave that property now because it's been converted to an organic regenerative farm. So yes, it's considered to be pervious, but only if it is truly healthy and treated properly.
I'll cut your lawn.
Yes, that too.
Another two, Ben, you mentioned funding issues. How can you get more state funding into the Highlands to do what you want to do and have to do?
I'll just repeat the question is how to get more funding into the state Highlands so that Ben and Julia can do what they want to do.
I
That's
wish
exactly right.
I wish I knew, Bill. We put together what I thought was a very rational request for increased funding for us. Right. There are a lot of things we need to do. If we're going to talk about stormwater in general, right? Just getting beyond the assistance to municipalities in doing their stormwater planning, right? An awful lot of the Highlands was where those developed areas exist. They were developed during the 70s, right? With different stormwater standards, if any, right? And we've got a tremendous burden to try to retrofit those places and bring them into compliance or to improve how we handle stormwater in those areas, right? That comes, right? There's got to be money invested. IBank funding would be great to have available to do stormwater revision projects to retrofit those places. Certainly the rules for development going forward are going to be better and result in better stormwater management, but that's only a part of the puzzle, right? And what we need is look, the Highlands is different. The legislation was passed for a reason. We can't be treated the same as the rest of the state because we have different purposes for how we manage the region, right? And getting that recognized at the state level, despite the legislation, has been a challenge. And we need there to be an investment into the region to meet the needs for the long-term good of the state, right? The health of the entire state is dependent upon the health of the Highlands. And so, getting that recognition across the board in Trenton is probably the key to being able to get us to get the adequate funding that we need to do the projects and to have the impact that we need to have.
Who could
Linda, I
possibly-
just I see a question in the back of the room. I just want to give time to. Yes,
The saltwater intrusion is pretty terrifying and, you know, for such a non-protected aquifer that we have in South Jersey. As a South Jersey resident, can you just talk a little bit about that?
the question is about saltwater intrusion, particularly as relates to the Pinelands.
Right, we're seeing evidence of that, obviously, in places like Cape May City, they've already had to get a desalinization plant. I remember when I first started at Pinelands Preservation Alliance, when that whole issue was brought up because of the decline in freshwater availability. So it is scary because, you know, I've seen that transformation. We're starting to see other areas where they've had to abandon wells along the coastline. Now, we haven't seen evidence of anything coming, you know, even close to the Kirkwood-Cohansey aquifer. I think the biggest threat's going to be is if the 800-foot sands, they start to lose all of that, where will these people go? Are you going to be building desal plants up and down the coastline, or are people going to put pressure on piping the Kirkwood-Cohansey over into the coastline, right? So it's just a matter of politics and who's around at that time and what decisions are made. So that lends itself to making sure that there's proper management outside of the Pinelands that takes into account water availability. And that's been a huge problem in the state, where we continue to allow development to occur without taking that into consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, Trish.
All three of you for the excellent presentation. It's really eye-opening, and thank you for your hard work. Jacqueline, you mentioned that the DEP is currently making a state water supply master plan. I wonder if you think it has been stronger, is there any teeth, and is there any provisions for forest protection?
The question is about DEP's surface water management plan and what Jacqueline's opinion of that is.
Right. I personally have not seen all the details yet. I don't know if any of my colleagues, but because it's still considered draft, obviously we can't speak one way or the other if it's going to have greater protection for forest area. The water supply master plan provides, I would say, historically guidance. I would say it's not necessarily have a whole lot of teeth, although the Pinelands Commission has often relied upon it to help set some foundation by which they can then go ahead and institute some greater protections. Now, the commission did just pass changes to its water allocation requirements so that they are now able to monitor, comment, and even stop certain water allocation permits at a lower threshold, which they didn't have the ability to do before. And they recognized because everybody was trying to get their allocations in under the threshold without triggering that requirement. So now we're talking about, you know, I forget the exact number, but like 100,000 gallons per day, for instance. So if you came in at 99,000, right, you could get away with multiple wells saying 99,000, and that still had a drawdown effect. Now they've lowered that significantly to about half. So that's one of the things where a good water supply master plan that identified these problems, that identified the need to like really get control of this, limit development as a result of water availability, could then help bolster, you know, other agencies' efforts.
Yes, question right here.
Question regarding, you guys both talked about development in the Pinelands and the Highlands, particularly with warehouses. Do you guys have any inventory of where warehouses currently reside and what are proposed?
Question is about warehouse development and whether there's an inventory of what exists and what's proposed.
We do in the Highlands. We've made an inventory of where they're located, where projects are proposed. We also have right now out for public comment. In fact, the last night was the last public session, amendment to our regional master plan to adopt warehouse siting and construction guidelines, right? That would limit warehousing in the Highlands could go. And once you locate it, how it should be designed. And we talk about stormwater management. We talk about groundwater recharge. We talk about solar ready, you know, building for solar ready. We talk about the importance of having a decommissioning plan for those warehouses, because they're not going to be there, right? They may seem like they're permanent, but they're not permanent. And what are you going to do with them once they've gone through their economically feasible life cycle? So we've addressed this directly, and we'll see what kind of impact we can have. I mean, there's still, we didn't ban them from the Highlands in its entirety, but we've limited it to the places that are existing community zone or designated centers.
Will those amendments apply to existing warehouses or?
No, they apply to it's all forward thinking.
Of course, I understand you can't, your grandfather did, they have some rights.
Yes.
But I just want to say about warehouses, especially for warehouses, potential warehouses outside of the Highlands or the Pinelands. It is so important that people be aware of what your local zoning permits. Because it's not just about land use, it's also about the regional traffic impacts. And I would argue that's an environmental issue as well. But the municipal land use law does not allow a planning board to consider off-site impacts when the planning board is considering an application. So you need to be involved. You need to know what your local zoning allows in your town. And there is funding available to communities to review their zoning and see if it permits warehouses. Unfortunately, in this crazy state that we live in, mayors try to balance their budget and they don't want to bring in children for their school system. So they look at warehouses as a rateable that is going to be popular, certainly for them. So please do not assume that your town does not allow warehouses. Once you figure out that, oh my God, there's one coming, it's too late. You need to look at your zoning for warehouses now. I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the State Planning Commission, the Office of Planning Advocacy, has warehouse guidance. Now you say, well, but it's not, it's not a mandatory. It's still a local zoning, in this state where every town guides its own. But it's not just about them. There frequently are DEP permits or DOT permits that are required, or DCA action that is required. And those state agencies are guided by the state plan. I also would be remiss if I didn't say that there is a new state plan coming, and I hope you're all paying attention and you all follow what's going on and comment, because it is fantastic, the work that the Office of Planning Advocacy is doing. We have also moved into an era of data management. The amount of data that's available to the public today and that is now mappable is absolutely astonishing. And when this process is finished, I think if you really dig, there'll be up to 200 various data layers that you'll be able to do. All our kids are going to be growing up doing GIS in kindergarten, but which doesn't happen now. But there is going to be a wealth of information available, not just to planners and engineers, but to people who are insomniacs and to you and me and everybody else. I mean, it is just an incredible, all the information that we need to argue for good planning is going to be available to the public. So watch for the new state plan changes too.
I agree with everything they've said. Now, in the Pinelands, we do have a little bit more protection and ability to make sure certain warehouse development doesn't violate standards as it relates to water quality and habitat. But with that said, warehouses can still happen, and we've had warehouses occur right on the edge. So then, that runoff, even though they're supposed to control it and this and that, still has an impact on the inside of the Pinelands. I will say this, a very useful tool, which I think we learned from you, Julia, where where a town might designate an area as a redevelopment area, sometimes is an early sign of something crazy getting ready to happen. So we've had places that have been designated as redevelopment area, forested areas, redevelopment area, which really that designation is meant for places that have been previously developed, but have been left to languish. They haven't been able to get people in to develop it, things like that, not forest areas. That happened in a community in the Pinelands. They were trying to do restricted age housing. They were also trying to do a warehouse. We were able to get the municipality, because of change of leadership, to rescind that redevelopment area. So that's a very useful tool where you can get active, organize, and that can be a way to stop certain projects where you think, oh, there's no way we're going to defeat it because by right they can build there. But in many of those cases, they can only do it by having a redevelopment area first. So that's a tool. And the Pinelands Commission also is tracking the number of warehouses. They do have that information available. Again, not as much a threat in the Pinelands as the Highlands, but we are definitely seeing them. Pemberton.
Okay,
Thank you.
did I see one last hand up? One last question? Yes.
This might be more than that, else, but it's chair too. So stormwater utilities and regional cooperation, there's 1,000 Hub 14, just 565 towns. We can as towns figure out how we should be collaborating. My township is in 9 Hub 14. So is there any way to get guidance to sort of map out this more mess?
The question is about stormwater utilities, town with multiple
No.
Act 14s and how to get started on that.
Yeah, I wish there was a central place you could go for that kind of guides. Look, to me, the most practical thing is look, we're going to get to stormwater utilities eventually because of the fiscal responsibilities that fall upon the municipalities, and they're going to have to do it eventually because of the budget constraints, right? You have budget caps, right, that are going to prevent you from spending too much. Existing municipal utilities authorities that extend beyond borders are the natural first step to that. You're already cooperating. You have a fee structure in place. All you have to do is, the hard part, the political part is going to be, you're going to be adding people who aren't already on water or sewer to the ratepayer base. But eventually it's going to hit them in the tax bill somewhere. So you do it on a rational basis where you can cooperate across town lines, look at things, right? You're never going to get to pure HUP 14, right? Watershed based planning, but you can get close, right? So get to the regional level, get as close as we can to doing it on a watershed basis. And that's probably, for government work, that's pretty good.
All right, well, I think we'll leave it there. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists.